All right. Well, my name is Lauren Forbes. I am a nurse practitioner, mainly located in the Sammamish Clinic, and today we will be discussing developmental milestones from that newborn age to 3 years of age. So, I like to start this talk off by saying this is a presentation intended to be educational, and it's not something intended to create any fear or anxiety. If, as I'm going through the presentation, your kiddo's not quite meeting some of the milestones that I'm discussing, I would encourage you to reach out to your primary care provider. I will say your PCP at each of your wellness checks is doing a developmental milestone surveillance, but we aren't with your child day in, day out the same way that you are. And so if you notice something, please bring it to our attention. And then once you start the conversation with your primary care provider, they can determine if, oh, I'm not so worried about it right now. Let's continue to monitor, and we can check back in 2 weeks or a month or whatever the time frame may be. And if we're still not meeting that milestone at that point, then we may have a further discussion at that point. Or your primary care provider may say, yeah, I am noticing that your child's not meeting this milestone or a couple of milestones, and so I think an evaluation would be beneficial. In which case, your PCP would then do a referral to an early intervention program. We are very fortunate because we have a statewide program that does provide developmental assessment and support to every child under the age of 3. And they will evaluate things like your child's social skills, your child's language development, their gross motor skills, their fine motor skills. And then, based upon that assessment, they'll determine if services are needed or recommended. And some of those services might be things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and there are more therapies as well. So, as many of you may be aware, there are incredible changes and milestones in the first 3 years of life that we'll be covering today. And what you'll see throughout the presentation today is that I've categorized many of the milestones based upon first the social language and self-help, also verbal language, gross motor skills, and then fine motor skills. So, as a newborn, to start off, a lot of what we're doing is we are sleeping, we are feeding, we are peeing, we're pooping. But other than that, what you may notice is your newborn may make brief eye contact with you. They'll certainly cry with discomfort. Depending on what they are crying about, they may calm to a familiar adult voice. You'll see them reflexively moving their arms and their legs. And then oftentimes you'll see babies, newborn babies, holding their hands in a fisted position like this. Now, at 1 month of age, they start to fix a bit more on faces, look more briefly at objects, and they'll alert to unexpected sounds. They'll start making brief vowel sounds at this point, and what you'll notice during tummy time is they'll start to lift their chin off while prone, not quite holding their head up, but just lifting their chin a bit. They'll also start to hold their fingers more open at rest. At 2 months, it's a very fun time because that's when they start to have their social smile, which is very adorable, and they'll start to watch you more as they're moving. They'll also be holding up their head while in tummy time, so they'll actually start to hold their head up and they'll open and shut their hands more at rest. As far as verbal language goes, they'll start making new sounds like simple cooing. I will say oftentimes at well child checks when I'm talking about developmental milestones, parents will ask, what exactly is cooing? And so I have included a video in the next slide because it's much cuter to see a baby do it than for me to try to imitate it. This here is a 3-month-old, and it's great because it shows some of the developmental milestones of a 2-month-old, which is kind of that simple cooing, and then also the 4-month-old, which is more of extended cooing. So it's a 3-month-old, so right in between the two. So that is cooing. So then we'll move on to the 4-month milestones. Again, for verbal language, it's that extended cooing sound that we heard in that previous video. As far as social language, you'll see them start to smile more to get your attention, and they'll also laugh out loud. For gross motor skills, they'll start to roll from prone to supine, which kind of is just the fancy way of saying from their tummy to their back. They'll also start to have improved head control at this age, and they'll start to look at their hands with more interest. At the 6-month age, it's a very fun time to bring your baby in front of a mirror because they'll start to smell their reflection and kind of engage with their reflection in the mirror. They'll start babbling, and babbling is sounds like ba ba, ga ga, na na, things like that that more closely resemble speech. They'll also start at this point rolling from supine to prone, so from back to tummy, and they will sit with support or maybe even briefly without support. They'll also start to reach for toys or other objects. Oftentimes, parents will say, yes, we've definitely noticed that, because if they're introducing solids at this point, they may say, every time I give my kiddo a couple options for food and I have the same food on my plate, they'll reach over to try to get their parents' food because it looks all the more appetizing on their parents' plate than on their own plate. At the 9-month age, they'll look for dropped objects. So if a kiddo's in a high chair and they drop food or they drop their spoon, you'll often notice that they'll move their head around to look to see where what they dropped went. They'll also start to turn when their name is called, and they'll be using basic gestures as well. They'll also start saying mama or dada non-specifically. So basically, when they say mama, it won't necessarily be just directed to you as their mom, but they will say it frequently in all sorts of different settings. They'll also be starting to sit independently, pulling to stand, and crawling. They'll be picking up objects with 3 fingers and their thumb and bang those objects together as well. At the 1-year mark, they will start to look for hidden objects. So like if a parent has their a ball right here, and then they put it behind their back, instead of your child thinking that potentially that ball has disappeared, they'll actually start to look to see where that hidden object has gone. They'll also start to imitate. So it's a fun time to do things like clapping or making sounds or doing facial expressions that potentially your child may imitate. They'll also say mama or dada with meaning this time, so actually directed to mom or dad, and they'll say usually about one other word as well. At 1 year is typically when we see kiddos start to take their first independent steps, which is a very exciting time. And they will pick up objects with a 2-finger pincher grasp like this. At 15 months, you'll see a kiddo start to point to ask for something or to get help. They will speak in sounds that are unknown, so it's almost like a secret language that they have, plus 3 words that we can more closely understand other than names, so other than like mama, dada. I will say on the next slide, it will be a video of a kiddo talking in this secret language because it's quite entertaining to watch, and it gives you a perspective of what you may see at 15 months. As far as gross motor skills, they'll start to crawl up a few steps, they'll squat to pick up objects, and they will find a lot of entertainment in dropping objects into and taking objects out of containers. So this is a 15-month-old speaking in their secret language. That is a very cute and very good example of that secret language we're talking about. So not the language that you and I may understand, but certainly that baby is trying to communicate something to you. Now, at the 18-month milestones, you'll start to see your child engaging with others to play. They'll be able to help dress and undress themselves. They'll point to objects of interest. So if they see an exciting poster board or they see a train go by, you'll see them pointing to draw your attention to it. They'll also turn to look at adults if something new happens. So if they do a new skill, they do want reassurance and look back at you. Or if a new experience comes up, like a new person or something they're not familiar with, they often look back at the adults in their life for reassurance. For verbal language, they'll start to say 6 to 10 words at this point. They will identify two or more body parts. And for gross motor, they'll start walking upstairs with help. They'll sit in a small chair. They'll even start carrying toys while walking. And then as far as fine motor, we can start doing a little bit of arts and crafts as we start to scribble and throw small balls. Now, 2 years I really think of as this time of a lot of development, but especially within verbal language. They, at this point, are using 50 or more words. I will say that with a caveat that oftentimes parents will understand their child saying 50 or more words, but what matters most is that about 50% of the words that your child is saying could be understood by a stranger. They'll also start combining two words or follow two-step commands like go get your toy and bring it to mama, those sorts of things. They'll be playing with other kids. They'll be able to take some of their clothes off, but not necessarily be able to put those clothes back on. They'll be scooping well with a spoon. They also will kick balls, jump with 2 feet, run, climb up ladders. So a very fun time to be at the playground. They'll also start to stack objects, turn pages in a book, and turn objects like knobs, lids, and toys. At 2.5 years old, your child may be ready to start peeing in the toilet. They will need help at this point, so likely not independent, but they'll be able to start that process of potty training. They will likely engage in pretend play. So you'll see that photo of that little girl with all of the doctor's equipment. It's very fun because they are very engaging during their play, and that specifically can be helpful for appointments, so it's not so scary or daunting. They'll start to use pronouns correctly and they will explain their toddler reasoning behind things. They'll be able to name at least one color and they'll start to walk upstairs 1 foot at a time and they'll still be running as well. They also can start to grasp crayons with their finger and thumb. They can start to catch a large ball, copy vertical lines, and use a fork. And then at 3 years of age, that's the time where we typically are starting to see independent toileting and also independent eating. Oftentimes kids will be playing and also learning to share more with others. They will now be able to put their clothes on independently, so they can take off their clothes and put them back on all by themselves. And they continue to enjoy playing make-believe. So things like they may play house or they may play being in the doctor's office, like we talked about in the previous slide. As far as verbal language development goes, they'll start to be able to use 3-word sentences, tell stories from books, compare two things. And at this point, we expect the language to go from being understood for about 50% previously to now 75% of words should be understood by a stranger. At this point, too, if you're interested, it's a good developmental time to try out pedaling with a tricycle. They'll also be able to climb on and off a chair. They'll be able to jump forward, and they'll also be able to draw a circle, stick figures, and cut with child scissors. So we have covered a lot of things, and you may be wondering, how can I start to track the milestones of my child individually at home? So there are many resources out there, but two good resources that are available is one, there is a free CDC milestone tracker app. And so it's an app you can get on your phone and you can look at it based upon your child's age, what milestones we expect them to be meeting. The other option is Ages and Stages text or newsletter. This is through the American Academy of Pediatrics, and you have the option either with a text, you get once a week, you get a text that's pretty short or sweet that goes over milestones to be expecting, tips or tricks to be thinking about at your child's age. And then there's the newsletter. The newsletter comes out once a month and it's more comprehensive and again talks about milestones that you should be expecting. It just covers a longer period of time. Now, does anyone have any questions?
Great. Thanks, Lauren. So our first question here is about families who speak multiple languages and if there might be a slower verbal development or what you might expect there.
That's a great question. And it's actually something that's been really researched in medicine because it's been controversial. I will say, generally speaking, we don't think that there will be a delay in verbal development. What we care about is that your child is meeting the language development milestones that we were discussing. It doesn't matter in what language. I will say, on occasion, depending on if all the other milestones are being hit, and we're a little bit behind, but we're almost there. Again, it's something that your primary care provider may say, oh, I'm not worried, we'll just keep monitoring. But generally speaking, we don't see much of a delay in the language development, even in multi-language households.
Great, thanks. Our next question here is if there's any benefit to getting evaluations done if your child is meeting those milestones and what that might look like.
That's a great question. And I would say, generally speaking, the answer is no. The reason why is because, like everything, there's only so many resources. And so we do like to allocate those resources to kiddos that aren't quite meeting their milestones, so really need those resources. And really, all that would tell us, the point of the evaluation is what services that your child can get. And so if we know that your child's already meeting all the milestones, there's no services that would be recommended for your child.
Perfect, thanks. Next question here is if a baby is born prematurely, if we're gonna, expect them to hit those milestones at the same ages, or is it a little bit different?
That's also a really good question. And it really depends on when your baby was born. And so, what I would say is that's more of a partnership with your primary care provider to say, hey, this is when my child was born, this is how premature they were. And then, depending on how premature your baby was, they may make some minor adjustments. In the end, they absolutely do catch up to all the milestones. But in the beginning, there can be more of a grace period.
Great, awesome. So our next question here is about a specific child. So this parent is explaining that their child's meeting their milestones just a little bit after they come in for that well care, and it's just pretty consistently been a kind of a little bit after. And they're wondering if if that's cause for concern or if that's considered normal.
Yeah, I'd say generally there's no cause for concern. There's no textbook that's perfect for every child, right? Every child is individual and have different uh, ways that they develop and grow in the world, and that's okay and that's beautiful. And what I would say is your primary care provider will be the best person to speak to that. But I would say, generally speaking, if it just were just a little bit after each of those wellness checks, we're hitting all those milestones, that sounds very normal to me.
Great, awesome. So next question here. Sorry, just one second here. Our next question is regarding language again. So if this family is wondering if you're seeing kind of a language delay, does that usually mean an issue with hearing, or is there anything that you kind of points you towards that?
Great question. So, absolutely, when we see a language development milestone not quite being met, one of the first things that we check medically is how your child's hearing is. So, part of that evaluation that will be done is making sure that they are passing their hearing. The first hearing test that your child will get is as a newborn. So that's fabulous because we have that baseline. But if they're still not hitting milestones later on, we do repeat that hearing check. And if all of that is normal and we just realize we need a little bit more help, then speech therapy can be quite beneficial.
Great, thanks. Another question about screen time. So there's a parent asking about any links between delayed milestones and screen time.
Yeah, so what I would say is generally speaking, technology should be limited, especially in the first couple years of life, just because it first of all can be a little bit overwhelming, and we want them to be experiencing all the things that's going on in the world. And so, if we are doing technology, that's okay, but I would say it should be limited. So it should be something that we certainly are not exceeding 2 hours. Ideally, the less the better. And really, hopefully, what we're focusing on are things like reading to our children, playing with our children, and allowing for moments of independence. And so, what I really encourage parents to do is, as your child is trying to do something new, not immediately going to help them, but giving them an opportunity to try to figure it out themselves. So, I guess all that to say there isn't any perfect data to say, yes, there is a correlation with this much screen time and a kid not meeting their developmental milestones. But I will say that if a kid is getting excessive time on technology, that certainly can impact their development and meeting appropriate milestones.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else? So another question about language. Is there anything parents can kind of help to do if they're seeing maybe a little bit of a language delay, or they're, hoping to help their child with talking more? Is there anything, any recommendations or advice that you have?
Absolutely. What I would say is first, reading is such a good thing to be doing with your children from the get-go. And so reading out loud to them and giving them opportunities to try to say things back to you as well. But I would say one of the easiest baseline things all parents can do is just narration. So you kind of feel like a crazy person initially when you're in the kitchen, you're saying, I'm going to take a piece of broccoli and I'm going to put it in the boiling water. And you're basically narrating what you're doing throughout the day. But what you're doing during that is you're exposing your child to an extensive amount of vocabulary and language, which is incredible. And kids are absorbing so much all throughout their lives, but especially in the first few years of life. So I would say reading and interacting is really good. Playtime with other kiddos is really good, but also that narration is a really easy and effective way to help with potentially exposing your child to more language.
Awesome. And then another specific question about our toddlers, I guess, is if they're starting to show interest in using the potty earlier than kind of what that milestone was, is it okay to start earlier or better to wait?
Absolutely. If your child's showing interest, earlier is completely okay to do. I would just say, I just caution parents whose children aren't showing interest earlier to really wait until their child is a little bit more ready to set you up for success. But if your child's already showing interest, you can absolutely start earlier.